Today we will be talking about food lab safety. Although the title of this is food lab safety, it really is applicable to just about any sort of kitchen environment. So a lot of these are going to be well translated to cooking in your kitchen at home, even though a few of them are specific to us in the foods lab at school. The first one is to prevent falls. You always want to make sure that you wipe up all spills at once. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be like a cup of water gets knocked over and spilled onto the floor. This could be any sort of liquid or anything that gets spilled onto the floor that needs to be cleaned up because it could make the floor a little bit slipperier than it should, or a little bit more slippery than it should be. So this could be from washing and drying dishes, and then a couple drips of water from each product that you're washing and drying falls onto the floor and then makes the floor really slick. It could also be if you are spraying a pan with cooking spray, like Pam, and you don't realize how much overspray there is, and then Pam gets sprayed onto the floor inadvertently, that can really be a dangerous situation. So you want to make sure that you're cleaning up everything as soon as you can, as soon as you notice that it needs to be cleaned up. You also want to make sure that you're closing cabinet doors and drawers so that you don't trip over them or hit your head on them. To prevent cuts, you always want to make sure that you're keeping your sharp knives sharp. A sharp knife is less likely to cause an accident than dull ones because you don't have to apply as much pressure. Because when you apply a lot of pressure, what tends to happen is a knife will be more likely to slip. And if you're cutting at counter height, where the knife would slip could end poorly by cutting your fingers. It could cut into your body, which is not something that we're trying to do. Use a cutting board. So if you don't use a cutting board, what you're going to be doing is creating microscopic cuts onto your countertop. So that's not good for the countertop, but it's also not going to be really, easy at all to make sure that you're able to sanitize and get into all of those like teeny tiny cuts. So it's much safer to use a cutting board that you can put in the dishwasher, or you can wash with hot soapy water and a sanitizing solution. When you are cutting, make sure that you cut away from you with the knife blade slanted. Never cut towards yourself. So if you cut away from you with the knife blade slanted, if the knife does continue to cut and it slips, it's going to slip into nothing and not into your body or your fingers or anything like that. For peeling vegetables such as carrots or potatoes, use a peeler instead of a knife. That is its intended purpose. It really does give you a little bit more control when you're peeling off the skin on vegetables like carrots or potatoes. If a knife or other sharp object starts to fall, get out of the way. Don't try to catch it in midair. This one does seem like it would be kind of a no-brainer that you should just get out of the way, but a lot of people's first instinct is to try to save it, and that's not really what you want to do. So just let it hit the floor, get out of the way, and then you can clean up any mess that would be caused as a result, but it's going to probably be a lot messier if you try to catch it and then you catch the wrong part of the knife. You always want to make sure that you wash, dry, and store knives separately from other dishes and utensils. So that just helps to make sure that it's not going to be in like your big utensil drawer, where if you're trying to find something and you're sifting around through the utensil drawer, then you find the knife and you have a big problem on your hands. Keep your fingers away from beaters and blades and appliances. So you never want to put your fingers near things that move, especially if the things that are moving are blades. So it really could cause some damage to your fingers in particular. Use knives and other tools only for their intended purpose. Their only intended purpose is to cut ingredients. It's not to open packaging. It's not to open boxes. It's not to sword fight with your friends. It is just to cut ingredients, and that is it. If there's broken glass, tell the teacher immediately. So tell me immediately if there's broken glass. Likely I will already know because I have heard the glass break, but don't try to hide it. There's a very specific way that we want to make sure that we're disposing of sharp objects like glass. So it's really important that I am the one that cleans it up. When opening cans, make sure that you cut the can lids completely off. So don't leave them hanging to where they're like still hanging on to the can. They need to be cut completely off so that that can lid is not like pointing upward to where you could cut yourself on it. Don't leave sharp knives and other sharp objects in a sink full of water. If you have run dishwater correctly, you won't be able to see the bottom of the sink because you will have a lot of bubbles. So it wouldn't be a good idea to just leave sharp knives in the sink because you won't be able to see that it's in there. You might not realize it, and then you would grab onto the blade of the knife, which would not be good. Moving on to preventing fires and burns, use salt or baking soda, not water, to put out a grease fire. Putting water on a grease fire could cause the grease to splash and then spread to another part of your kitchen, whereas salt or baking soda will actually smother the flames and put it out because it's not going to be able to get oxygen, and fires need oxygen in order to survive. Keep flammable materials away from the top of the range, that's a stovetop, and away from portable appliances that produce heat. So flammable materials would be anything that could catch on fire potentially. So that would include recipes, packaging, dish towels, paper towels, jackets, really anything that is able to catch on fire, you want to keep off of the stovetop. Use a dry pot holder to remove pans from the oven. So if you use a wet pot holder, what's going to happen is when you touch the pot holder to the pan that you're trying to take out of the oven, that is going to heat up the water, and then you're going to get a steam burn, or the heat's going to be transferred through the water into your hand. And either way, you're going to get a pretty nasty burn. So it's always a good idea to make sure that your pot holder is completely dry. Keep pan handles turned inward on the range. Again, the range is the stovetop. So you need to keep them turned inward so that if somebody is walking by, they're not going to get their clothing or their body caught on that handle and then dump all of the contents down onto the floor and probably onto themselves, which would cause them to burn themselves. So you really want to make sure that you're turning them towards the center so that there is no risk of it being knocked off in that manner. When you remove a pan lid, tilt it away from you so that you're not going to expose like your forearm to that heat. And also don't hold your face directly over the pan. So you don't want to get a steam burn, especially on your face. That would be very painful. So never hold your face directly over that steam. It's also not a good idea because you don't want to, have the hot steam hit your face, you start to sweat, and then sweat into your food. So that would be a sanitation issue. When removing a pan from the oven, pull the rack out. Don't reach into the hot oven. It's just a smart thing to do to make sure that you're not going to burn yourself. So pull the rack out just a little bit, enough that you can get the pan out of the oven without having to, maneuver in such a tight space. Check to be sure that all appliances are turned off when you're finished with them. So making sure that anything that you had turned on is turned off, specifically the oven or the burners, so that they're not on continuously. Use a spoon or tongs, not your fingers, to remove food from pots and pans. So this one is twofold. It's definitely not a good idea to reach your hand into a pot of hot food because that could burn you, like burn your fingers. But it's also not great for sanitation to be digging your hands in your food. So always use a utensil. Preventing electrical shock. The overarching theme of this one is water and electricity don't get along, so let's try not to make them play together. So we want to make sure that we're keeping electrical cords away from water and hot objects. We don't want the water and electricity to mix, but we also don't want to melt the protective coating around the electrical cord by stringing it across a hot surface. Unplug portable appliances after you use them, and unplug portable appliances before you clean them. Portable appliances are appliances that you could unplug and pretty easily carry around your kitchen. So this would be like an electric can opener, a blender, coffee maker, food processor, toaster, something like that. Whereas not a non-portable appliance would be the refrigerator, the oven, a microwave. So things that aren't as easily maneuverable. Before using an electrical appliance, make sure that your hands are dry and that you're standing on a dry surface. You don't want to be the object that completes the circuit. Sanitation procedures. Keep books, purses, and other personal items in your locker. Don't bring them into the foods lab. So this one at home would be not bringing unnecessary things into the kitchen and taking unnecessary things out of the kitchen so that you don't have extra stuff. Wear appropriate clean clothing on lab days. Avoid long loose sleeves and dangling jewelry. Again, the same goes for your home. Making sure that you're wearing clean clothes. Make sure that you're avoiding long loose sleeves and dangling jewelry because you probably don't want to string your jewelry through your food or your sleeves through your food, because then you have food in your sleeves and jewelry and you just put clothing and jewelry through your food, which doesn't sound super appetizing. Pull your hair back and secure it so that it stays away from your face and your shoulders before you enter the foods lab. Pulling your hair back before you cook is a really great idea because you don't want to be touching your hair. There's a lot of germs in your hair, a lot of bacteria, but we also don't want to loosen that hair enough that it gets into our food. Don't work with your food if you have an open wound on your hands. So if you have a cut or a blister or something that is kind of open, you don't want to be working with food unless you have covered it with a bandage and a glove. Wash your hands with soap before you begin the lab. Dry your hands on paper towels. Don't use the dish towels. So you always want to make sure that you're washing your hands with hot soapy water before you cook. And then it's a great idea to dry your hands using paper towels because whenever possible, we want to try to throw our germs away. While working with food, avoid touching your hair, your skin, and your face. Again, those areas just have a lot of germs, so we don't want to be unnecessarily introducing germs into our clean cooking environment. Repeatedly wash your hands when necessary, especially after coughing, sneezing, and using the restroom. So for obvious reasons, coughing and sneezing will create more germs. The restroom is probably a pretty germy place typically, so we really want to make sure that we're washing our hands really well. In the foods lab, if you were to leave the room for any reason at all, I will make you wash your hands upon returning because I don't know exactly what you touched while you were out of the room. Wipe all countertops and tables at the beginning and end of each lab. So whenever possible, we want to start with a clean surface, but we also want to end with a clean surface. Use hot soapy water for washing dishes. Wash dishes, pans, and utensils as you use them, allowing them to dry on the drain board whenever possible. So you always want to try to air dry them whenever you can because any germs that are on a dish towel would get transferred onto whatever dishes you just cleaned, but air drying them does not introduce more germs into or onto those dishes and utensils. When tasting food, use a spoon other than the one used for stirring. Use a clean spoon for each person tasting for each time food is tasted. So there is to be no double dipping when you are using a tasting spoon. So it's perfectly acceptable if it's safe to do so. So if you're not using something that could potentially give you foodborne illness if you are using 1 spoon to taste for each person tasting, and then you clean the spoons between each time you taste. So no double dipping with the spoon. Whenever possible, use a kitchen tool, not your hands, to complete tasks. If there is a kitchen tool that can do it, that's probably the best tool for the job. While it is perfectly possible to mix up cupcake batter with your fingers, it's not necessarily the most hygienic thing to do. So we want to make sure that we're using a mixer or a mixing spoon. Foods Lab rules: work only with your assigned group in your assigned area, no wandering. Dry your hands on paper towels, not with the dish towels. So again, whenever possible, we want to make sure that we are throwing our germs away. When not actually cooking or cleaning, sit at your assigned table or at your assigned seat. No horseplaying of any kind is permitted in the lab. Okay, that goes for pretty much any kitchen. It's never a good idea to be messing around in the kitchen and just kind of being rambunctious. So when you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, it's really important that you are serious and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you have your mind on the task at hand. Talking is permitted in the lab only if it is kept in whispered voices. I have to be able to get your attention at the drop of a hat for important announcements, for a safety reminder, things that I need to tell you. So it's really important that we keep our voices to a minimum. You're allowed to communicate with your lab group members, but it really is important that I am able to quickly and efficiently get your attention, especially in the event of an emergency. Observe all common sense safety precautions. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of Foods Lab rules, but if I had to go over every common sense safety rule, we would be here for days. So don't touch the hot burner. Don't use your finger to test the sharpness of a knife. So all of those things that should be common sense are kind of covered with this one. So just think before you act and make sure that it's a smart decision. Follow instructions for your lab exactly. Follow your recipe exactly. So don't make alterations unless you ask first, but even then I'll probably tell you that you need to stick to the recipe. Treat all appliances and equipment with respect. So just be careful and make sure that you're treating it nicely and you're just being careful with whatever it is that you're using. Wash each item carefully in hot soapy water. Make sure that it gets really clean between each person using it and between each group. Clean all countertops, appliance surfaces, and tables thoroughly before beginning lab and at the end of each lab. So make sure that we're starting with a clean surface and ending with a clean surface. And then put all clean, dried appliances, utensils, and equipment in their proper places. So typically that is wherever you found it, unless you found it and you know it's in the wrong spot, in which case please put it back where it should be. Place the dish pan, dish drain board, dish soap, and hand soap under the sink. There's a little basket under the sink to make sure that if one of those were to tip over, it's a little bit contained, so make sure that those get put into that basket. Dry out the sink with dish towels. In Plainfield, we have really hard water, so it's really important that we are wiping down the inside of the sink so that we don't get water spots. Place all linens, so dish towels, dishcloths, and green scrubbers, into the laundry baskets. Sweep the floor. If you make a mess, you are in charge of cleaning it up, even if it's an unintentional mess. So it's just important that everybody does their part to sweep the floor in their kitchens. Double check all surfaces and items in your area. Make sure that everything is clean. Make sure that it is put away. Make sure that everything is turned off. And then return to the classroom area tables when given permission to do so.